I now invite to the dais Dr. Sanjay Kaul, author of An Alternative Development Agenda for India, published by Routledge India Originals and imprint of Taylor and Francis Group. Dr. Kaul is a development policy analyst, a former IAS officer and corporate leader. He has over 4 decades of rich professional experience in both the government and private sectors. He was recently appointed chairman of the Government of India Task Force on Early Childhood Care and Education and is an advisor to the Government of Karnataka as well. So, can we please have you on the dais?
Thank you. Distinguished panelists, Dr. Ms. Rajni Dhingra, Dr. Sinha, and friends. I am truly overwhelmed by your support and thank you profusely, each one of you, for being here today. It means the world to me. I would particularly like to thank Dr. Sen, Ashok Alexander, and Vrinda Swarup for agreeing to be panelists at the launch. I'll take about 15 minutes, and in the past few days, I have grappled with the best way to capture the essence of my book for you. I begin by trying to answer the first question that is likely to come to your mind. What is this fresh approach in the book to tackling India's development challenges? After all, we all agree that since the liberalization reforms of the 1990s, we've had reasonable economic growth for several years. Yet, and that is the point I'm trying to make, several disturbing signs have emerged. India is one of the most unequal societies, with the bottom 20% mired in deep poverty. Our already low levels of employment have been declining even further in recent years. Human development indicators in respect of health, education, and nutrition have improved, but altogether do not tell a flattering story. A significant section of the population, especially in towns and cities like ours, reside in conditions that can only be described as unlivable. India has a very limited window of opportunity, perhaps for the next 2 decades at best, before it begins, like several other economies, to make the transition to an aging society. So the time for course correction, if at all, is now. It is in this context that the book offers what we feel a feasible alternative development agenda that I call the people first imperative. A fundamental question arises, and I have been a civil servant for many years. Why have government policies and programs not provided significantly improved well-being and livelihoods for poor households and jobs for the millions of our educated youth? In my quest for answers, I've been singularly fortunate that I had the privilege of looking at government policies and programs from a dual perspective. First, on the inside, as a civil servant and IAS officer, where I was fortunate to have worked in several social and development sectors, including education, public health, food, and working in both the rural as well as urban departments. More recently, I spent close to almost 14, 15 years in the corporate sector, working in the areas of food and agriculture. My understanding, of course, has been reinforced by discussions with colleagues and friends and significant amounts of evidence-based scholarly work, both in India and globally, on what works and what does not. In framing an alternate development agenda, I consciously and deliberately picked 7 interconnected areas that matter, I feel, most to people: health, education, food and nutrition, child development, gender, jobs, and urbanization. So each chapter starts with a dispassionate diagnosis of the systemic issues plaguing the sector, following by what I feel are practical and implementable solutions to address them. In addition, and what in my view sets this book apart from other excellent development policy literature, is that I have tried to view these issues from the eyes of a typical impoverished family, In my book, this fictional tribal family, Birsa and Rasika, and their 3 children's travails connect the chapters and the narrative. The objective is not limited to critiquing of government policies, but rather my attempt has been to trigger a healthy debate and discussion on vital issues and find practical and feasible solutions. So therefore, in looking at issues from the lens of Birsa and Rasika, 4 connected and fundamental premises emerge. First, our current preoccupation with GDP growth does not automatically provide Birsa and Rasika's households significant improvements in their condition, even with the large number of very good welfare programs for the poor. Second, the book's analysis shows that, and that has been my focus on human development and livelihoods rather than what I called economic growth and welfareism adopted by successive governments is a better approach. Even well-directed welfare programs by themselves do not enhance the productive capacity of households when compared to well-designed interventions in health, education, and nutrition. Third, the book finds that the conventional argument that all of us and civil servants share that view of government mismanagement and corruption and nepotism does not fully explain poor outcomes. Instead, it is the book's hypothesis that an inadequate understanding of poor households and poverty and the lack of a full understanding of how government works together result in what I call systemic flaws in the design of many human development and livelihood programs. Finally, the book's analysis shows that poor households may not get significantly enhanced livelihoods through agriculture or traditional livelihoods. So we have to go elsewhere. It is only large-scale planned urbanization that can provide the millions of jobs that India so urgently requires. And that's why there's a special chapter on urban planning. The central theme that emerges is that an alternative development agenda sharply focused on enhancing people's well-being and livelihood is not only an urgent imperative, but also one that is feasible and fiscally sustainable to implement. And this, I view, is possible within the constraints of government functioning and within the constraints of existing ground realities. Families such as Birsa and Rasika are so caught up in their daily struggles that they often remain untouched by even well-intended and well-intentioned government programs. The book also notes that the government has limited implementation capacity. Should we therefore have hundreds of programs? And I've noted that there are over 400 of them with small budgets, with the systemic shortcomings that I talked about as we currently have. Instead, the book recommends that we focus only on a few critical interventions, well-designed, that can have a visible and tangible impact on people's lives. In each of the sectors that I've covered, we ask and address several uncomfortable but basic questions. I plan to share with you in the next 7-8 minutes a few of them to give you a flavor of the issues that I have addressed in the book. In the health sector, and we have some doctors and directors of hospitals here today, we ask, why is the service quality in our primary health care system and large hospital and a very vast hospital system so poor in contrast to well-run private facilities? Why is it that despite an extensive hospital and primary health network, the first port of call of many poor households when they fall is the untrained local health provider rather than a government facility? The book challenged the conventional wisdom that India needs to add even more hospitals and increase the number of primary health facilities. In contrast, the book's analysis reveals that a numbers game only diverts meager resources away from the upkeep and staffing of existing facilities and could even, in some times, be an obstacle to strengthening the public health system. Would not, therefore, I ask, improving the primary health care in existing community level and block level hospitals reduce the pressure on district level and tertiary hospitals, such as the All India Institutes? After all of us know that most patients coming to AIMS ought to have been handled at a much lower facility. In addition, rather than focusing only on curative care through the hospital system, our priority must pivot to the prevention, early detection, and management of diseases. The book argues that a well-designed preventive and promotive healthcare system would reduce the number of people requiring hospitalization in the first place. From health, we move to food insecurity and malnutrition, where we investigate what is an obvious apparent paradox. India spends close to as much as 3 lakh crores on food security and nutrition, which includes the world's largest public distribution system, the world's largest midday meal program, and the largest child nutrition program. And this is the highest spent by any country, even if you measure it in per capita terms. Yet, why do poor households, and especially young children, continue to have the problem of calorie deficits and huge nutrition imbalances? And we ask, does poverty alone explain the situation? And this is a little contentious. The book argues that perhaps poverty and hunger do not always go hand in hand. The analysis in the book shows that it has been incorrectly assumed that supply of cereals and supply of nutritional supplements are adequate to tackle malnourishment. As we explore in the book, by better understanding household behavior, it is possible to identify, and that is what I have done in the book, to identify a set of workable and cost-effective solutions to improve nutrition outcomes. The book next shifts its focus to school education. We ask, why do government schools perform so poorly? And what can we do to improve learning levels? In higher education, after all, government institutions are on par or even better than privately funded counterparts, so why not government schools? We challenge the conventional wisdom that once you open schools, provide teachers, and supply textbooks, the rest will largely take care of itself. We also challenge the hypothesis that private schooling alone is not the answer. We recognize that a lot of formal learning of children studying in private schools from educated and well-off households like ours takes place not in the school but at home. And this is what is a point that we are trying to address. Birsa and Rasika and other uneducated households are unable to provide such a learning environment at home. Further, the current rigid curriculum system leaves both the teacher as well as the child alienated from the system. The book therefore delineates a set of strategies that are teacher-friendly, that can improve teacher and government school performance, and also provide a supportive learning environment for children from impoverished households. Health, nutrition, education are excellent enablers for households to enhance livelihoods, but are meaningless if there are no jobs. So how does the government create the jobs and livelihoods for the millions of our youth and poor households? And how does it enable women to enter the job market in large numbers? Birsa and Rasika and many in the ilk are caught in a vicious poverty trap as they continuously borrow money and move from one crisis to another. Despite the best government strategies, there will always remain, and that is what I firmly believe, limited opportunities in agriculture and limited opportunities in traditional livelihoods. Most labor-intensive manufacturing industries such as apparel and food products, for example, have witnessed either stagnation or a decline in employment. Consequently, graduate unemployment has risen sharply, while the number of self-employed young people has also declined. And the female labor participation is one of the lowest in the world, at an abysmally low 24%. The book's analysis shows that most decent livelihoods and jobs will not be in rural areas, but will emerge in towns and cities. With limited opportunities in rural areas, migration to towns and cities may therefore be the first step to changing Birsa and Rasika's economic trajectory. The book identifies multiple building blocks for supporting labor-intensive enterprises in urban areas. And while looking at these strategies for improving livelihoods, a key focus is on women's livelihoods and on changing mindsets on gender issues. The next question arises. What happens when households migrate to towns and cities? Where do they live? We are talking of mass scale of migration. We are talking of maybe as many as 50 million plus households getting into towns and cities in the next 2 decades. The living conditions in urban settlements, even for existing poor households, is deplorable. So in this most challenging situation, what can and what should government do? Should it live in denial and continue to look for solutions in rural areas? Or look at trends globally and begin planning for the large influx that is not only inevitable, but also because economic growth, we all know, will come only in urban areas. Already, 60% of GDP comes from towns and cities. We therefore ask, what can government do to improve the deplorable state of sanitation and sewage systems? How can it deal with the near absence of decent low-income housing in our towns and cities? And how can it reduce congestion on our roads? The book advocates a fresh approach with what you might find a few counterintuitive proposals. For example, in contrast to the government's effort at giving house sites and building homes for poor households in cities, we advocate a somewhat radical proposal to create a private sector-led low-income housing market to enable migrant and poor households to rent decent housing. Most migrant households cannot afford to buy houses. Similarly, we take a hard look at public transport and ask, is bus transport the most cost-effective strategy in comparison to the high capex metro systems? I've estimated that limiting a metro line by just 1 kilometer could finance as many as 800 Volvo buses. Similarly, we ask, should government continue to yield to the demand from motorized vehicle owners like ourselves sitting here to widen roads that leads to further shrinkage of pedestrian paths, or should it give priority to building more pedestrian paths? Did you know that in a city like Bombay, 55% of people do not commute by trains or cars, but by walk? And this percentage could go up if the focus was on building walking pathways. The development agenda that the book sets out is an integrated, holistic plan across the sectors that we have analyzed. The final set of crucial question remains. Yes, there may be good strategies in the book, but where is the money? Does this agenda mean pulling our resources out from other critical sectors such as defense, infrastructure, and highways? The book demonstrates that there are cost-effective solutions to the issues discussed. In the final section of the book, we have done a meticulous estimation of the amounts required for my development agenda, and I conclude that a mere 2% of GDP would be adequate to fund the alternative development agenda proposed. Tax experts, and Dr. Sen is here with us, are unanimous in their view that current India's tax to GDP ratio at 17% is very low. There is therefore potential to garner an additional 5% of tax revenue to not only finance this development strategy, but also finance other vital areas of the economy. I remain indebted to the innumerable people whom I have interacted with in this learning journey, and several of you are present here today. This includes my brother Ranjan, my son Rohan, my editors, my colleagues and friends. Without trying to compromise on academic rigor, I have attempted to write the book in a reader-friendly and accessible style so that it could be of interest to the general reader and all concerned citizens, and not limited merely to economists, social science professionals, and the academia. The overall arching vision of the book is one that I'm sure all of us present here share in, that a caring, responsible polity that ensures the well-being and decent livelihood for all of its citizens is eminently achievable. I hope this book triggers healthy debate and discussion on these issues. I would indeed be very pleased if even a few of the book's proposals find a place in the election manifesto of political parties or in policy documents and the states as we head for the 24 elections. I seek your support in this endeavor and look forward to discussing some of the ideas presented in this book with you at multiple forums. Thank you very much again for your presence here today. Thank you.